the Terrifying Lies podcast with music and stories by Craig Nybo. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Terrifying Lies podcast. I'm your host, Craig Nybo. Thanks for coming back. It means the world to me that you're here as we close in on the end of this series of intra-season episodes. I love creating the show, and if you're enjoying it as much as I enjoy making it, I want to let you know how you can support it. If you want to keep Terrifying Lies alive and kicking, consider backing the show by visiting patreon.com/terrifyinglies. For less than half the cost of a Big Mac meal each month, you can keep this monster breathing. Plus, depending on your backer level, you'll get cool stuff. Ad-free digital downloads of the stories and songs at the end of the season. A limited edition t-shirt. Something cool, an album, a book, or a board game, mailed right to your door. But enough about that. Let's get on with the show, shall we? Between seasons, I've gotten into a habit of letting the Freestyle Gargoyles take over the show. If you've been listening, you know what I mean. They swoop down out of nowhere, grab the microphone, and chaos takes over. In case you're new to the show, here's how the Gargoyles work. I bring some of my author friends into the studio. They read an original story, and the whole thing gets set to a completely improvised soundtrack played by a live band. It's wild. It's messy, but there's beauty in that chaos. Today's authors are Daniel Swenson, a returning gargoyle, and Blake Casselman, making his debut. Two great writers, one crazy show, and hey, if you've ever wanted to become a gargoyle, it's easier than you think. Just send me a message on Facebook or drop an email to craiglnybo@gmail.com, or if you see me in the street, grab me and say, "Hey, Craig," however you want to get a hold of me. There's a very good chance I'll send you an invite to come into the studio and get on the next recording. All right, the stage is set. Let's turn it over to Daniel, Blake, and the Freestyle Gargoyles. Let's go.
Trembling, Alex gripped the sides of the sink, staring at his reflection, hollow eyes and pale skin glistening with sweat. He had been here before. Every night the same thing since childhood. The voices, whispers crawling beneath his skin, gnawing at his sanity. "Help me," a voice echoed in his mind, sending a shiver down his spine. Alex closed his eyes, breathing deeply as he reached for the bottle in the cabinet above the sink. With shaking hands, he popped the cap and swallowed several pills, hoping, praying for a few hours of peace. But peace was ever elusive. The pills dulled the voices, blurred the visions, but they never silenced them. He still saw the dead, hovering at the edges of his vision, their faces twisted in torment, mouths moving in soundless pleas. His therapist called it schizophrenia, claiming the dead couldn't talk or plead, but Alex knew better. His gift or curse was real, and it was relentless. When he was younger, the hauntings nearly destroyed him. He withdrew from the living, screaming into the void of the spirits, haunting his mind. His parents abandoned him. Only David, his older brother, stayed, but even David couldn't save him from the darkness. The pills helped, but not tonight. He's coming for her. This voice was different. It was urgent, terrified. Alex froze, hand hovering over the faucet. Slowly he turned around. A pale, translucent woman stood there, her eyes wide with horror. Blood streaked down her chest, soaking her white nightgown. "I've been murdered," she whispered, trembling, "but he's not done. My sister, he's coming for my sister." Cold dread settled in Alex's chest. Who's coming for her? The woman stepped forward, her face twisted in anguish. "I need you to help me. Please." Alex pressed his back against the counter, heart pounding. "No, I can't." The words tasted bitter. He had promised himself never to do this again. Not after the last time. Not after the nightmares. But her desperate, pleading eyes cut through his fear. "He's going to kill her," she sobbed. "Please. He killed me, and he'll do the same to her if you don't help." Rational thoughts screamed at him to ignore her, to walk away, to take more pills. But another part of him, the part that had never turned away from the dead, whispered otherwise. "All right," he muttered, rubbing at his temples. "Tell me where she is." The woman's eyes brightened with hope. "She's at the old farmhouse, just outside of town. Please hurry." Without another word, she vanished, leaving Alex alone in the suffocating silence of the bathroom. The drive to the farmhouse was torturous. The night was pitch black, and the road wound through a dense forest. The woman's voice echoed in his mind, urging him onward. After what felt like an eternity, the dilapidated farmhouse appeared. It sat atop a hill, windows dark, roof sagging. The air reeked of decay, and dread weighed heavily on Alex as he stepped out of the car. "You came," a faint voice echoed from the porch of the farmhouse. Alex approached and found the murdered woman standing next to the door, eyes wide with fear. "He's inside," she whispered. "Please save her." Alex nodded, his throat dry as he approached the door. It creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air inside was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under his weight as he moved cautiously through the house. Shadows seemed to crawl in every corner, and his heart pounded in his chest. And then he heard it, a faint cry from upstairs. His pulse quickened as he raced up the stairs, breath coming in sharp gasps. The house seemed to close in on him, the walls narrowing as he zipped to the top. A door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, light flickering inside. Alex pushed open the door. The room was empty except for several candles lit and a figure standing at the far corner. The man stood with his back to Alex in the shadows. He could see that the man was several inches taller than him, with broad shoulders. The man appeared to be holding something, someone that fought to escape his grasp. It was the woman's sister. Alex's heart stopped as the man turned to face him, light reflecting off the face he knew all too well. "David?" His brother grinned, a cruel, twisted smile that chilled Alex to his core. "Well, well," David said, his voice low and menacing. "I'd wonder when you'd show up." Alex's mind reeled. "What are you doing?" David tightened his grip on the woman, finishing what I started. Alex's stomach churned. His brother, the only one who had stood by him during his darkest times, was a murderer. You killed her," Alex said. "And now you're going to kill her sister?" David's grin widened, eyes gleaming with madness. "She deserved it. They both deserve it. No one, and I mean no one, rejects me and gets away with it." Something snapped in Alex. Fear, rage, and betrayal surged within him. Before he knew what he was doing, he lunged at David, tackling him to the ground. The woman's sister screamed and scrambled away past the fighting brothers. David was stronger, landing brutal blows, but Alex fought with desperate fury. He struck David's face, sending blood spraying. David barely flinched, his hands closing around Alex's throat, squeezing. Alex gasped for air, vision blurring as he clawed at David's hands. You always were the weak one, David snarled, just like our parents said. With a surge of strength, Alex kicked David in the gut, causing him to double over. Alex scrambled to his feet, but David was on him again in a heartbeat, smashing a chair across his side. Pain exploded in Alex's ribs, and he crashed into the wall, knocking over several candles. Hot wax splattered across the floor as shadows danced wildly on the walls. David's fist connected with Alex's jaw, sending another shockwave of pain through his skull. Alex stumbled, barely managing to stay on his feet, his vision blurring as the room spun. One of the old curtains, dry and brittled with age, caught fire where the candles had fallen. The flames crackled to life, eagerly devouring the faded fabric. Within seconds, they spread, licking up the length of the curtain and casting an orange glow throughout the room. Heat rolled off the growing blaze, and thick, acritic smoke began to choke the air. David's eyes flickered briefly to the fire, but showed no concern. He pulled a knife from his belt. The blade gleamed wickedly in the firelight. You should have stayed hidden, he growled, his voice low and venomous. Alex barely had time to react before David lunged at him. The knife flashed in a deadly arc. He tried to sidestep, but David was too fast. The blade slashed across Alex's arm, leaving a jagged, bleeding cut. Alex screamed. The pain searing his blood poured down his arm, dripping to the floor. The fire roared behind them now, consuming the curtains completely and climbing up the walls. The heat was suffocating. The black smoke curled toward the ceiling, filling the room with a thick haze. The wooden beams above groaned ominously as the flames reached higher, threatening to engulf the entire house. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Alex's eyes darted to the broken chair nearby. In desperation, he grabbed a leg of the chair and swung it at David with every ounce of strength he had left. The makeshift weapon smashed into David's shoulder, sending him stumbling back to a step. David charged again, and the knife plunged into Alex's chest with a sickening force. The blade sliced cleanly through his ribs, and Alex gasped. His lungs seized as white-hot pain exploded through his body. He staggered back, blood pouring from the wound, drenching his shirt a dark crimson. His vision blurred, and for a moment, all he could hear was the crackle of the flames and the frantic pounding of his heart. David loomed over him, blood smeared across his face, his cold, motionless eyes fixed on Alex with a predator's calm. "You can't win," David whispered, his voice devoid of any humanity. Alex's legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor, strength draining away with every beat of his heart. Blood pooled beneath him, warm and slick, as the room spun violently around him. The flames had nearly reached the ceiling, devouring the wooden beams with a ravenous hunger. The heat was unbearable now, the air thick with smoke that clawed at Alex's throat. But it was the icy numbness creeping through his limbs that scared him most. This is it, he thought. I'm going to die here. But then faintly, through the roaring flames, he heard another voice. The voice of the murdered woman whose death had haunted him for weeks now. "Don't give up," she whispered. Her voice was a ghostly echo in his mind. With a trembling hand, Alex reached for the hilt of the knife buried in his chest. Pain screamed through his body as he tore it free, blood gushing from the wound in a hot, relentless stream. David's back was turned, convinced the fight was over. He never saw it coming. With a surge of desperate energy, Alex drove the knife into David's back, the blade sinking deep. David's eyes widened in shock. His breath hitched as blood bubbled up from his mouth. He stumbled, desperately trying to grab the knife protruding from his back, his strength faltering. You can't, David gasped, but the words died on his lips as the light drained from his eyes. His body crumpled to the floor, lifeless and still. For a moment, there was nothing but the crackle of the flames and the suffocating heat. Alex's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps as he stared at his brother's body. Pain radiated from his chest, every beat of his heart a reminder of how close he was to death himself. The fire had spread to every corner of the room now. The walls, the ceiling full of blaze. The heat seared Alex's skin. The smoke filled his lungs. Choking with each breath, he couldn't stay. Summoning the last of his strength, Alex dragged himself towards the door, his body screaming in protest with every agonizing step. His hands left bloody smears across the walls and furniture as he stumbled forward. The smoke growing thicker, blinding him, the heat unbearable, and every breath felt like fire, but he refused to stop. The house groaned as it burned, wood splintering and walls creaking under the heat's relentless assault. But Alex had no time to think. He focused on one thing: escape. Every inch forward was agony, his chest bleeding profusely, his muscles screaming in protest, his breath raggedly escaping his lungs, the taste of smoke thick on his tongue. The front door was just a few feet away, a beacon of hope in the chaos. He could feel the cool night air wafting against his cheek, teasing him with the promise of freedom. But as he inched closer, a suffocating darkness began to creep in from the corners of the burning house. Shadows twisted and writhed in the smoke, inching closer like sentinels. It was as if the darkness itself has come alive, waiting, reaching. Whispers rose from the shadows, faint but barely audible at first, growing louder as the darkness neared. Alex, they called, soft and sinister. These voices weren't begging for salvation like the others had. This time they were beckoning him, luring him, pulling him towards them. Come with us, they seemed to say, their promises as cold as the void. Panic surged through Alex as he felt the tendrils of darkness wrap around his legs, pulling him backwards. His vision blurred, blackness encroaching on the edges of his consciousness. His heart pounded wildly in his chest, his body teetering on the brink of collapse. No, not like this. He wasn't ready to give in. Summoning every last shred of strength he had, Alex let out a final scream, a primal sound that tore from his throat. With desperation he didn't know he had left. He threw his body forward, clawing at the ground, and with one final agonizing lurch, he crossed the threshold into night. He collapsed onto the cold earth outside, gasping for air, as if tasting it for the first time in years. The darkness recoiled, retreating back into the inferno as the fire raged on. But its whispers lingered in his mind like a curse that wouldn't let go. The house roared behind him, the flames devouring what little remained of the structure with a deafening crack. It collapsed inward, disappearing into the roaring inferno. Alex lay on the ground, barely conscious, his body spent and broken. The cold night air washed over him, a sharp contrast to the searing heat of the flames. His blood pooled beneath him, warm against the freezing earth. He felt the coolness seep into his bones, pulling him deeper into oblivion. The last thing he felt before the darkness claimed him was the biting chill of the night. His breathing slowed. The fire roared, fading into darkness. A sobbing woman rushed to his side, her frantic voice and desperate as she cried out for help, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his wounds, trying to stem the flow of blood. Alex's mind drifted in and out of consciousness, the world around him a blur of pain and fading sounds. could feel the life slipping away from him with every labored breath. Through the haze, another voice emerged. He barely registered the words, but the tenderness in them cut through the fog. "Thank you," the ghost of the murdered woman's sister whispered, her voice filled with quiet relief. Her words lingered, hanging in the air like a final promise. And with that, everything went black. The world dissolved into an oppressive, suffocating darkness heavier than the void of unconsciousness. The pain didn't fade. It lingered, sharp and cold, like a wound that refused to close. The fire's roar became a distant hum, swallowed by a silence that felt alive, as if the shadows themselves were watching, waiting, but the peace never came. Instead, the whispers returned louder now, crawling through the darkness like venom. The voices of the dead, the ones Alex had failed, the ones he couldn't save, echoed in the void. Their cold fingers clawed at his soul, pulling him deeper into the abyss. There would be no release. There would be no escape. As the darkness tightened its grip, he realized this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of an endless torment where the shadows would never let him go.
Michael's smile was easygoing. His easygoing manner charmed her, so Celia made the easy decision to trust them. It helped push away some of the anxiety she'd felt since meeting Michael online 2 weeks earlier. She had taken nearly 48 hours to accept his sudden and unexpected invitation for them to meet in person, and spent another 3 days fretting over what to wear, how to fix her hair, or who to call to rescue her if the date went sideways. How he might try to hide his disappointment seeing her in person for the first time. Her easy decision would turn out to be the worst one she ever made. "I've never done this before," Celia said in an attempt to break the awkward silence. They had settled after they had seated themselves in the restaurant. A plate, silverware, and a folded napkin were laid out in front of her. A thick menu sat crossways across the plate. Michael was already thumbing through his. "You always hear horror stories about online dating." As she spoke, Celia fiddled with the silverware and unfolded the napkin to place it on her lap before immediately returning it to the table. Michael's charming smile made its return. "I'll do my best to make it not too frightening for you." Celia relaxed more, the tension gripping her neck and shoulders melting away. Michael was handsome and well-groomed. His close-cropped salt and pepper colored hair and trimmed beard lent him a distinguished manner. He was older than the men she'd normally dated, but recently her choices had been more limited. He wore a dark jacket over a black button-down shirt and blue jeans, which showed a casual but not dismissive taste in clothes. He was prompt for their meeting in front of the restaurant, looked her in the eye, and warmly took her by the hand as he introduced himself. He topped off their greeting by holding the restaurant's door open for her. So already he was miles ahead of most of the men she dated. "I guess I'm just a little surprised," she said. He looked up from his menu. "Why is that?" She looked for a hint or smile or irony on his face and couldn't see the question was genuine. "Really, Mike?" She was steering the date to the part she dreaded. She had promised herself she would be the one to bring it up, the one to control the conversation before it inevitably drifted to her recent past. "I don't know if you've watched the news lately." "It's Michael," he corrected. "And yes, I have watched the news." The tightness at her neck and shoulders returned as a nervous flutter touched her stomach, knowing that the make-or-break moment of their date had arrived. She straightened her posture with a slow exhale. "Do you know about my legal troubles? The civil lawsuit brought on by the family of a former student?" "Yeah, that one," Celia said. The nervous flutter drained away as she realized her control of the conversation had gone. "Let me see if I have this right," Michael said, his attention back on her. "Before the lawsuit, there was your arrest, loss of employment, and a plea bargain to avoid jail time. We all have a story to tell, don't we?" "Well, there is my side of it, which really hasn't been told," Celia said. Yes, she had taught 11th and 12th grade English at a permanent substitute at the local high school while the regular teacher was on maternity leave. Yes, she had started a relationship with one of her students, beginning innocently with after-school visits to her classroom before progressing to time spent together away from school, frequent texting, and covert dating at places where they wouldn't be recognized. What hadn't been covered by the media, however, was how their relationship had not escalated into a physical one until the day of his 18th birthday. True, he was still her student, but a legal adult by the law's definition. Michael returned to his menu. "Of course," was all he said. His response struck her as odd. Was he letting her off the hook this easy? "Don't you want to hear my side of it?" "Not really," he said. He seemed much more engrossed in the menu than her public humiliation. "Okay," she said with a low sigh. She realized she had been holding her breath while waiting for Michael's response. Now she felt almost disappointed he wasn't showing more interest in her past transgressions. Her attention shifted to the restaurant's interior, wishing their server would come to take him from the menu and possibly back on her. The dining room was tastefully decorated. Dark wood siding with matching tables and chairs contrasted with plain eggshell white walls. The only thing out of place was how empty the room was. She and Michael were its only occupants. "I'm surprised this place is so empty," she said. "I've heard people do nothing but rave about it." In a corner opposite their table was a wooden sign, "Restrooms," with an arrow pointing down an adjacent hallway. She wondered if it was time to excuse herself, call her sister Sophia to come fetch her. "I'm so sorry, Michael. My sister just called. There's a family emergency. Can I take a rain check?" "Oh, the restaurant's closed. Staff shortage," Michael said. The revelation felt like a punch to her midsection. When they had entered the restaurant, Michael had seated them. She realized there had not been a greeter at the front desk, ready to welcome them or ask how many were dining. "Then we're not?" she asked, her voice trailing off. "Having dinner?" Michael said, finishing her sentence. "No, we're not." A cold whisper of dread settled inside her. "Call your sister. Call Sophia now." "Then why did you bring you here?" Michael finished her sentence again. simple. You needed a proper starting place. The dread she felt transformed from a whisper into a raging storm. For what? She heard herself say. Michael turned the menu's last page. Underneath it was a Glock 37 pistol. Alarmed, Celia looked from the Glock to Michael and back to the Glock. She remained rooted in her chair, despite the panic filtering her mind, wanting to know if he was playing some sick joke on her. But her dry mouth made any coherent speech impossible. You have a 30-second head start, Michael said. Running down a garbage-strewn alleyway, Celia cursed her choice of footwear as she stumbled and nearly lost her footing. Running in hills was not something she had mastered, and she wondered why she had chosen them over the pair of flats she had considered wearing first. Michael was less than 30 paces behind her, walking at a determined pace, but showed no urgency in his pursuit. She paused to yank off her heels and abandon them, braving the alleyway's cracked and uneven asphalt on her bare feet, to run a full sprint. The street she spilled into from the alleyway was dark and quiet. No pedestrians or traffic anywhere. Ahead, a lonely traffic light blazed red in an intersection before turning green. The entire town seemed oddly empty. She paused to catch her breath, leaned against a car parked at the curb. Fire burned in her lungs. Her legs trembled with fatigue. Pain lanced the soles of her feet. She felt lightheaded and wondered how close she was to passing out. Footsteps clicked on the sidewalk. Michael stepped from the alleyway at the same relaxed pace. She resumed her flight, crossing the street to disappear down another alleyway, wider than the previous one. She swiveled her head, looking for access to someplace she could barricade herself inside. Risking another glance over her shoulder, she glimpsed Michael entering the alleyway. Despite how fast she had pushed herself, the distance between them seemed unchanged. With a frustrated cry, she increased her pace. Her body screamed in protest. A loud pop behind her, and something small and hard hit her in the lower thigh of her right leg. She lost her balance, lurched forward, smacked face first into a nearby brick wall, and crumpled next to a rusted-out dumpster. Her hand clutched at the stinging pain of her leg, and she looked at it. Her swimming head could barely acknowledge the blood covering her hand. More blood dripped from her chin to dapple the front of her blouse. She gingerly touched her nose and cried out at the intense pain. It wasn't the first time she'd broken her nose. Michael approached her with the Glock still raised. He looked passive, almost bored. He stopped under the glow of the weak pool of light and lowered his weapon. Tears mixed with blood on Celia's face. "You don't understand," she said between hitching gasps for air. "I didn't groom anyone. It wasn't rape. It was all consensual." "Oh, sweetheart," Michael said, pocketing the Glock. "I don't care." "Then why are you doing this?" Finally, Michael showed her a smile. "Because it's your time." He drew a large knife from a hidden pocket inside his jacket. Its long blade glinted in the dull light. "It's always someone's time." As Michael knelt before her, and Celia felt the knife's blade cut a line down her forehead, followed by a connecting circle, her screams filled the alleyway. A sharp pain lanced her head as blood poured down her face, filled her mouth with a bitter, coppery taste. Before she escaped into consciousness, she spelled out what Michael carved into her head. P-E-D-O. "That's not what I am," she said to herself before darkness enveloped her. Or is it?
this has been the last intra-season episode of Terrifying Lies. Next time, get ready for the debut of Season 5. I put together something epic, and I think you're going to love it. As I put these episodes together, I always picture you on the other side. I ask myself, what can I do to keep you entertained, to keep you coming back? The fact that you tune in means a lot to me. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. I truly appreciate you personally. Until next time, I bid you sweet dreams, or should I say, sweet nightmares. This has been the Terrifying Lies podcast. Please come again. You're welcome here.